Hello and welcome to Wave Radio. I am Trúc Việt, journalist and producer of the Wave Radio. We have a very special interview today with Mr. Mahan, who is running for mayor of San Jose. Welcome, Mr. Mahan. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Xin Chào Quý vị. It's great to be here with you, Chi Trúc Việt. Thank you so much for having me.
As you may know, that the Vietnamese people value the human rights dearly because we came here as a refugees.
Yes.
Vietnamese community is still marginalized when it comes to having their voice be heard by the local government. If elected as the mayor, how can you make sure that you are different from other elected officers, such as your opponent, Cindy Chavez? What do you do that make the Vietnamese people feel like they're not marginalized and not behind the room and divide our community?
Thank you. I think it's a very important question, and I'll start by saying that I'm the only candidate for mayor who supported all of the Vietnamese candidates running for city council in the primary. I went to their kickoff events and gave them money and was out on the campaign trail with them. I'm the only candidate supporting the sole Vietnamese candidate in this race. And, frankly, my opponent in this race and her political machine has targeted and taken Vietnamese council members out of office, putting ideology in a political machine before representation. And I think it's really important that our city council reflect the diversity of our community. We have a large, vibrant Vietnamese community here, over 150,000 members of our community. And it's a good thing to have the Vietnamese voice on city council. I think it's a tragedy right now that a city that is nearly 40% Asian American does not have one Asian American council member. So I do think there's more to who you support than simply their race or their gender, of course. But I am committed to having an open door policy with all Vietnamese candidates, giving them advice. And for those who I think have the right ideas and credentials and are ready to represent the community, I will be aggressive in giving them coaching and financial backing and helping them be viable candidates, because I want to see the diversity of our city reflected on the city council.
Are you Democrat?
I am. I'm a Democrat. I consider myself a moderate Democrat. I grew up in a working class family. My dad was a letter carrier. My mom was a school teacher. And growing up in California, we were pretty progressive. But I also went off to college. I went to Harvard. I studied economics, among other topics, and history. I started a business. I was in business for many years. And my own political beliefs became more balanced. And I moved to the middle as I saw that neither extreme has the full story. There's something to learn from liberals. There's something to learn from conservatives. There are good values and important lessons across the political spectrum. So I've really tried to find a middle ground where I work to bring people together to find solutions. I'm interested in what works. I'm not interested in parties or ideology. I think far too many places in our world are driven by ideology rather than what works. And you mentioned earlier the history of the Vietnamese people as political refugees here. And, my wife's family fled Cuba. Her mother and her mother's side of her family lost everything because of a communist regime that was driven by ideology, what they thought was idealistically the right thing to do, instead of what really worked. You have to look at history and look at what actually works in practice if you're going to serve the public effectively.
You are more likely based on common sense.
Well, that is the idea, is yes. And, my political views, I have to say, have been very much shaped by my experience campaigning where I have focused on knocking on doors. I spend most of my time out in the neighborhoods talking to people, because when you talk to thousands and thousands of people, you really get a good sense of what the community thinks and what the community needs. And I believe in that common sense from the community level.
And this question is a pressing issue for most of the Vietnamese people. As you remember, Professor Ron Haydock, the one did the presentation at the city council meeting on August the 27, who strongly advocate for the non-citizen vote. He explained that the American history have showed that non-citizen people had a right to vote already. It's already existed. But ever since the racism sentiment spreading from one state to another state, non-citizen voting rights were eventually eliminated. What is your rebuttal to the Professor Burks that his statement that based on racism? I
Well,
know that you
yeah,
oppose it, you
yeah,
against
yeah.
and what's your rebuttal?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. So first, let me just repeat that my position is to oppose non-citizen voting, because I think that citizenship is is an aspiration. It is something that is an ideal. It is something that we want people to be proud of. It's open to people of all races and ethnicities and backgrounds of all kinds. But it's better when it's something that is sought and earned and has that meaning. And a big part of what gives it that sense of value is that it comes with the right to elect your representatives in your representative democracy. And I think there's a lot of challenges with trying to implement it in today's world. The professor makes a good point, but I want to point out something that the professor did not point out. Historically, a big part of the reason that the country did not have firmer rules around citizenship or around borders or around a lot of issues that we do today is that it was a much simpler world, and the country did not have the population it has today. One of the big challenges in the early years of the Republic, and I have to say, this was, of course, we have to note, this was incredibly tragic for the native peoples who were here. But one of the challenges for the early country was actually quote unquote settling the land, having the population grow and expand. And again, it was tragic it was horrific what happened to the native people here. But at the time, they were encouraging people to immigrate from European countries, and borders were much more fluid, and the world was changing dramatically at that time. So it was a very different time. Today, we have over 330 million Americans. We have a lot of more complex issues, and our system of government is much more sophisticated and complex. And so I just think the world changes. I am sure, I don't deny what the professor said there. I am sure that there are plenty of people who wanted voting to only be for citizens for racist motives. Racism does exist out there in the world, and I think we should call it out and we should combat it. What I don't agree with, though, is labeling every opinion we disagree with racist as a way to try to argue against it. And I think there are other good arguments for saying that citizenship should be a process. I think it should be legal and open to anyone who is here who wants to make that commitment to our country. If you are here and you're a contributing member of the community and you want to make the commitment to our country to be a citizen, there should be a legal pathway for you to earn citizenship and thereby earn the right to vote. And I just think that is the right policy position for us, given the circumstances we face today, even if the world was very different 100 years ago.
Mhm. Let's just switch to the work culture. From the CEO of a private high-tech sectors, now you're switching to become a city council. Have you experienced any cultural shock from the high-tech high-tech, company?
It is. And some people say well, government should just run like a business. And I don't think that's entirely true. There are some very significant differences that we should be aware of. In government, we don't choose our customers. We don't have just one product or service, which many businesses do. We have many functions. We have to serve everyone. We have to serve everyone equally. We should serve everyone equally well. And even when we do a good job, it's not like our revenue just suddenly grows dramatically. We still are stuck with the revenue we have, finite resources. So, there are differences, but I would say that there is a lot to learn from business. And really, I learned this even not in business. As a public school teacher, when I first came back from college after graduating from Harvard, I came back to the Bay Area and made a 2-year commitment, the Teach for America program. And in that program, they taught us to be very data driven. And I had the same lesson in the tech world, where we had to measure everything we did. We had to set clear goals before we went and spent $1 of investment money, or we spent 1 hour of work. We had to define upfront, how will we measure success? Very concretely, what is success? How do we measure it? How do we know if we're moving toward it? And what I'm really trying to bring to government is what I would call a new culture of performance management. And I don't think it's unique to business. Business is typically very good at this. The idea of objectives and key results, which came out of Intel, and then Google borrowed them, and now everybody has OKRs, or a lot of people do, or KPIs. These are standard business practices, but they work for any organization. I think that when we pass our budget, which is a multi-billion-dollar budget, we should set 3 to 5 strategic goals. We should be clear about which programs and which policies are meant to help us achieve those goals. And we should be very clear with the public when the things we're doing aren't working. And I think if we were doing that, you would see very different policies on homelessness, on crime, on building housing. And I further think that every year our pay raise as elected officials should be tied to making progress on measurable goals, because you deserve that from a government that consumes a lot of tax dollars that's your money.
What is KPI? You
Oh, key
mentioned
performance indicator.
uh, key
Performance
performance.
indicator. Yeah.
The Metro newspaper named you the disruptor if elected as a mayor for the city of San Jose. What are the pressing issues you will tackle first for the first year of being a mayor? Because you just
Thank you.
mentioned about based on the data, and then
Yeah.
based on the data, then what pressing issue you think you will tackle? You will try to change first.
Let me give you 3 very quickly. The
Mhm.
3 issues I think are most pressing today, and there's a relationship between them. But the 3 is homelessness, crime, and the lack of affordable housing, the high cost
Mhm.
of housing. And they're all related in different ways. On homelessness, I don't think that we are being cost effective enough. Right now, your government is spending about $850,000 per door to build brand new apartments to house the homeless. And that is great. It works for those lucky few who get it, but it's too expensive.
Sorry to interrupt you. The government here, you're talking about city government or county government.
Mostly, well, both, but mostly county. We are building brand new housing. And don't get me wrong, we need housing. I'm going to talk about that one third. But I
Mhm.
don't think that we can solve our housing crisis or solve homelessness at a rate of almost $1 million per unit. It's just too much. When government does it, it's very inefficient. And we're using taxpayer money. We're taxing our middle and working class to build apartments at a very expensive and slow rate. I think to end street homelessness, we need to build simpler dwelling units, more basic, but still safe and individual shelters, such as prefabricated modular units that can be placed on government-owned land. I think we need to hold the county accountable for bringing back some version of a mental health hospital. I think we need inpatient treatment for addiction and mental illness. I think we need to require that people come inside and at a minimum live indoors. And I think most people who are living outside want to come inside, but don't have the option. And we owe it to them to provide basic housing for everyone quickly and cost effectively. And that's not what we're doing right now. We're doing it in the slowest and most expensive way possible. I think we need to scale up quickly and cost effectively at a much lower cost, basic shelter and inpatient services, and help people transition indoors and even require that people come indoors. On affordable housing, we have a much bigger and tougher challenge, and there's no way we can solve it primarily by taxing ourselves. We as a region have been adding 6 jobs for every 1 home we have built. We have had very unbalanced growth. We need to hold cities across the state, particularly some of our neighboring cities, accountable for building housing when they add job capacity. We have made it, we have cities close next to us, like Cupertino, that will add 10,000 jobs and not permit any new housing. We have to have more balanced growth. And part of the solution at the city level is that we need to increase the efficiency of our permitting process. We need to keep fees on building housing low. We need to streamline and really make it easy, remove barriers to building housing so that private investors will invest in building housing for our growing population. The city has made it very slow and expensive to build housing. And as much as I understand that there are folks who will need us to subsidize housing, we cannot solve that problem simply by passing taxes to build brand new housing for everyone who needs it. We need to encourage the market to also create housing. And we've broken the housing market in California. We've made it too slow and expensive. And then finally, on the topic of crime, and there's a connection, of course, all of these are connected. If people can't afford the rent, if they get displaced, they become homeless. If they become homeless, they are more likely to fall into addiction and mental illness. If that's the case, then they're more likely to get involved with the criminal justice system. And what we're seeing right now is people who are committing street level crimes, stealing, vandalism, assault, who are being arrested and then released over and over again because we don't want to keep people in jail, but we haven't invested in the alternatives. And I think that's wrong. And we're not helping the people who are committing the crime, and we're not keeping the rest of the community safe. And I want to see us hold people accountable and have a consequence, but that consequence should also be rehabilitative. It should be about helping them turn their lives around too. And that means drug treatment, mental health treatment, job training. Right now, our police department's very frustrated because they're arresting many of the same people over and over and over again. It's a revolving door, and it has to end.
Regarding the affordable housing, would the cities get any help from HUD, housing, urban development?
We do, but it's really a small amount. So right now, even when the private sector builds housing very efficiently, it still costs over $500,000 to build a brand new home. So the cost of building is very high. So when we get money from HUD and we get a few $1,000,000, that's nice, but you can't build a lot of housing with that. We have a gap. Statewide, I'll just give you the statistic. It's pretty shocking. McKinsey, the consulting firm, estimates that we are about 3.5 million units short, meaning job growth and population growth has gone so much faster than housing production that we have a gap of about 3.5 million homes. With the current cost to build, the cost of building all of that housing would cost something between $1.5 and $2 trillion. there's no way we can tax ourselves to do that. We need to enable the private marketplace to build housing. And that's how we've always built housing in California. Over 95% of our housing in the entire state was built by a housing developer to meet market demand because the population was growing. And we've added rule after rule and regulation and process and fee and tax to the point where the cost to build is higher than they can get, than people can afford with their incomes. And so we're not building new housing. And that really, we have to bring down the cost side of the equation and remove barriers so that the private marketplace will start building housing again. And some people say to that, well, that housing is just luxury housing. That's for the rich people. That's for the tech workers. But I want to remind people of something. Every time a new apartment comes online, comes onto the market, and one of those rich tech workers rents that apartment, that's one less people who is competing for and bidding up the price of the affordable housing, because it's ultimately about supply and demand. And the problem is, if we don't build new housing, those tech workers are going to our existing affordable housing and making it more expensive because they can pay more for it.
That's
So
what
we have
happened
to
in
build
San
more
Francisco.
housing. What's that?
That's what happened. That's what happened in San Francisco.
That's exactly what happened. And I will tell you, I lived in San Francisco for a while when I was running my first company, and there was no housing. My wife and I ended up for a little while in a rent-controlled apartment. We could have afforded to pay more. We just couldn't find anything else. And so we took an apartment, not intentionally. I didn't even know it was rent-controlled until we were looking at the lease. But we ended up renting an apartment that was rent controlled that could have gone to someone low income. We could have paid more, but there was no option. There was nowhere else to go. So it's really supply and demand. That's really the issue.
Um, this question is, I think that most of the Vietnamese voters want to hear because, as you mentioned about the police and the crime,
Yeah,
and you think that's from my understanding that you want to hire more
I do.
police officers. But
So
at the same time, I heard that the police labor union demanding 15% raise if elected as a mayor. How could you hire more police officers when labor union demand such a high raise like that? How can you have money to hire the police officer with that high cost?
that's a good question. So first of all, yes, I do want to hire more police officers. We are understaffed in San Jose. We have roughly about 11, almost 12 officers for every 10,000 residents. Most cities have more like 20 to 40, so 2 to 4 times more officers per capita. So we need more officers. That's why our response times are so slow. We don't see as much community policing. We don't have as much police presence and engagement as we should have. On the other hand, you ask one of the key questions. And look, I think my view is we need to pay our officers well. We need to make sure that we can attract and retain officers and attract high quality officers and retain them through their careers. But we also need to have enough money to hire more officers. And that's the balancing act. And that's really the job. That is the judgment of elected officials. That's where you all have to be able to trust that we are going to serve the common good of the community and work toward that balance. I have not supported the full raise that they are asking for because it means fewer officers. And I want to find a middle ground. My opponent in this race is doing press conferences right now advocating for the full raise because I guess she thinks it's good for winning votes. But it's not what the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing to do is to find a middle ground, to find a raise that will keep our officers here, but allow us to add more officers. And if you look at the data, it's very clear that we can find a middle ground. Our police officers now, of the 15 largest departments in the Bay Area, we are now the third highest paid, and we have the lowest vacancy rate. So we are very competitive. Of the 15 largest, we have the third highest pay. Our average officer now with overtime is making $189,000 per year. And we have the lowest vacancy rate, less than 3%. So yes,
Mhm.
should they continue to get raises? Do we want to stay competitive? Absolutely. But should it be more than other city workers and be 14% over 2 years when we are struggling with not having enough headcount in the budget? No, it's too much. And we need to find a middle ground that's good for the community.
I'm interested more in east side of San Jose
Yeah.
because it consists of many diverse communities, particularly where the large Vietnamese business and residents have been, located for many years. How will you help east side communities improve their street, blighted area, and security, preventing window breakings and catalyst
Yeah. Catalytic
stealing?
converter stuff.
Yeah, catalyst converters. As you may know, Eastside San Jose is not in the plan of Mayor Sam Ricardo to enforce more beat cops and patrol cops, according to the San Jose Spotlight article.
Hmm.
Uh, so, if elected, how can you improve the East Side San Jose, reduce crime, so the Vietnamese people feel so happy that their car is not their catalyst converter still in underneath their
Yeah.
car,
Yeah.
and the window breakings will be reduced.
Yeah.
What's your plan? How can you
Yeah.
help the East Side San Jose?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I used to be a teacher in the East Side. I used to
Mm-hmm.
teach in Alum Rock, and you're right. It is a beautifully diverse community. I loved teaching in the Alum Rock School District, and I'm still in touch with many of my former students from all backgrounds. That's part of the beauty of East Side San Jose and really our whole city. I think that the best way to be fair to East Side San Jose is to go
Mm-hmm.
back to my favorite topic, which is using data. I think that
Mm-hmm.
we need objective measures that tell us how we're doing in each neighborhood. I'm talking about things that are very important and very measurable: crime rates, road conditions, park conditions, the amount of shade. These are all, the canopy cover, the amount of trees. These are
Mm-hmm.
all police response times. These are all measurable and related to city services. And I think that when we are more rigorous about measuring how we're performing in delivering services and the outcomes, we have to look at not just are we delivering services, but what's happening on the other side. Are they working? Are we helping communities get to the outcomes they need? I think we will force ourselves, we'll be accountable for making the investments in the neighborhoods that need the most support and historically have been neglected. And I think that is an important approach for us to take as a city, because we're all in this together. We are one city, and we need to lift up every neighborhood, especially the neighborhoods that are struggling the most, if we're going to all succeed together, if we're going to have a vibrant, safe, healthy city for all of our kids. Because if things are not going well in one neighborhood, that eventually impacts the whole community. So I think, though, that the way to get everybody on the same page and to actually go make those investments is to have the measures, the data that allows us to all say, okay, this park is in much worse shape. It needs the investment first. Or this neighborhood has no trees. This needs to be where we expand tree cover. So everyone in our city deserves to have fast police response times, roads that are safe and well paved, parks that are well maintained, a permitting process that treats them fairly and is efficient. And we need to use data to hold ourselves accountable for actually delivering those services to everyone.
This question, I don't know that it could be in the mayor's responsibilities or not. Childcare cost is one of the major issues, but always buried underneath other more souted for political campaign. If elected, What plan or policy would you adopt to help families with
Yeah.
children?
Yes, this is a big issue, and it's something I think about because I have two little kids. Sylvia, my wife, and I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, Nina and Luke. And we are so lucky. We are very blessed to have the ability to send them to a preschool. And if we didn't, I don't know how we would both work. I mean, we also rely on my mother-in-law for a lot of help. So childcare is extremely valuable, and it enables more equality, more gender equality, and it helps our working families and makes the country more economically competitive. It's a very good investment. And it's better for the kids and their outcomes when they have an enriching and safe environment. So there are a lot of benefits. The question is, how do we expand it? And you're right, the city has a very limited role here. This is traditionally something you would think of as a county and state type of program, because the county and the state manage most of our health and human services and oversee our education system, whereas the city is responsible for things like police and fire response, roads, bridges, parks, streetlights, those kind of permitting, code enforcement, those kinds of things. So, and then of course we run the airport and the clean energy system. So what I would say is the city does have a role to play. First of all, we have libraries and community centers all over the city that are city-owned facilities that have programming. And I want to see us continue to expand our library hours and bring new programming into our libraries and community centers to create safe places for our children to spend time and to learn and grow. And I think we need to leverage private sector investment to help us do that. Because we have a bunch of big employers, tech employers, whose workers are here in San Jose, and we need to convince them to invest dollars here in our community. Second, we have a real lack of childcare options, and they declined dramatically during COVID. The estimate I recently read, and please, everyone should do their own research, but I believe what I read is that our county lost about 300 childcare providers, maybe it was daycare centers, during COVID, which makes sense. A lot of people had their kids home and were not paying childcare providers. So what can the city do with this? Well, we don't have the money to go fund brand new providers' operations, but we do have an office that deals with land use. We can help them find vacant retail space and buildings where landlords are looking for new tenants. We can help them do the analysis of which neighborhoods are most underserved in terms of childcare centers to help them find those areas where there might be more customers, more demand. We could even use the Community Stabilization Fund, which is being funded by Google in anticipation of building out their campus here. We could use that to help with startup costs, to help a new daycare center pay a couple of months of rent, go through the permitting process, and get up and running. Now, they still have to be able to sustain themselves. We can't fund them forever, but we can help jumpstart a number of new childcare centers in the community, and I think we'd all be much better off.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As you may know that the Vietnamese communities, the Vietnamese voters in general could only see the politicians when they run for the positions, when they want to get elected or re-elected. That's the only time we could see them. They promise a lot that, oh, you can contact me anytime, but
Yeah.
after that, they're hard to get in touch with them. So if elected, what will be the best way for the Vietnamese people to reach you once you are mayor?
Yeah, great question. And I have seen that happen over and over again. And I think part of the reason is that when we are campaigning, we're doing something very important, of course, which is meeting lots of people, hearing their concerns, answering their questions, sharing our ideas. But when you get elected, you then want to go get stuff done, which of course takes a tremendous amount of time, working with city staff, reading reports, looking at service providers. There's a lot of other work that has to be done, and it becomes kind of overwhelming. So here are the 3 things that I want to do to stay better connected than many elected officials are able to stay connected. One that's very obvious is I want to make sure that my staff reflects the diversity of our community and that I have strong Vietnamese, well, I will hope to have Vietnamese colleagues on the council, but also Vietnamese staff, which I currently have on my campaign, um, to make sure that I have that conduit, the liaison who is close to the community and understands the culture and the language and can make sure that I am fully aware of things that are bubbling up, that are happening in the community. So that's one strategy. Another strategy is that I think that to be efficient, because again, on the campaign trail, you're out talking to people all day, but you're not getting much other work done. That's the problem, is that, you're not actually being as productive at doing the policy work that needs to be done. So there's a trade-off. I think one way to balance that, and I've committed to this for the Vietnamese community, and I will do it for others as well, but I think I want to start with the Vietnamese community on this. I would like to have a regular press conference, including questions and answers, that is open to all members of the Vietnamese press and other community leaders, the heads of nonprofits and other groups. I would like to have a central and recurring on a regular schedule so we can be efficient about it, where we can all get together in one room on a regular basis every couple of months, let's say, and I can share an update and then take questions and answer them so that everybody is on the same page and knows what we're doing. And I hope you see the president of the United States do this a lot. The president has the press briefings.
Yeah.
The reason is because it's more efficient. You cannot go out and have as many one-on-one conversations or you'd never get your job done. So you have to be more efficient about it. But I think having a recurring press briefing for the Vietnamese community would be very, very valuable. And it's a two-way conversation, not just me talking, but also hearing feedback and questions. Finally, going beyond just the mayor's office, I am committed to improving customer service at City Hall. You should not have to come to the mayor with all of your questions and complaints. You should also know that your city government is going to have good customer service and be accountable for delivering those services. One of the things I've done in my council office is create a constituent services portal, a web page, where people can go to see frequently asked questions and to submit new questions. And we've tried to use technology to better manage customer service. We actually track how long it takes us to respond to people. So that's another strategy.
Wonderful. The Vietnamese people, I keep talking about Vietnamese community center. I personally think that it would cost a lot. I don't know. Until you are elected, you would, based on the data and the budget, you would tell me whether it costs a lot to have a Vietnamese community center for the Vietnamese people. But when I look at the Vietnamese cultural garden,
Yeah.
have a lot of empty land. Do you think about just bring some trailer, place it there, and make it become a Vietnamese community center? Do you think it's
That's an interesting
workable?
idea. Well, I think so. Good idea. You're right. Building is very expensive, and that we don't have money today to even hire enough police officers. So we have to focus on the basics. I do think that the Vietnamese Heritage Garden is an important gathering place that has been underinvested in. It's been neglected, and the community deserves from our parks budget to have investment there because it is one of the public spaces that the city owns that has a lot of use. Many people use it, and many more people would benefit from it if we invested in it. So it needs to be prioritized within our parks budget as a place where we will invest in things like a bathroom and shade and seating and more of a gathering place to make it a welcoming and beautiful space, a public space like any of our public parks where the community can gather. So I do believe in doing that. You're right that building a proper community center is very expensive. And it's also, there's a challenge if we build community centers for specific communities. At some point that becomes very difficult because of how diverse our city is, and we want to be fair to everyone. So I do think having gathering places is critically important. I spend a lot of time in Vietnam Town and or Grand Century Mall and Little Saigon, and there's many different parts of the city where there are gathering places for different ethnic groups, and I think we need to keep investing in those. But I like your idea. It's creative, right? More cost effective to try. So maybe that is part of the solution. I'm open to learning more, thinking more about that.
This question is about fear. Lately, there's a combination of two things. One of our member in the communities received a cease and desist letter from the opponent, Cindy Chavez, a letter from her attorney. We feel like our freedom of speech being violated.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, a few weeks later, the incident happened in LA City Council. It's no way for them to feel confidence that the city councils represent for everybody, for all the ethnic groups. What is your message going to send to the Vietnamese community, convincing them that you're different from your opponent, you're different from city councils in LA? We feel
Yeah.
marginalized. We
Yeah.
feel like, especially now, we don't have any representative for us in city councils.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what was said by those council members, I believe it was 3 council members in the city of Los Angeles, is completely unacceptable. They should resign. That racially motivated policy making and trying to marginalize groups and making fun of people on the basis of, well, anything, but especially race and religion and gender. There's no place for that in our politics. I think it's completely unacceptable. I it should go without saying, but unfortunately, I guess it has to be said. I never use that kind of language, and I don't think about the world that way. I grew up in a town that was an immigrant community. I was actually there weren't a whole lot of white people in my hometown. I grew up in a town where I was the minority, at least within that town, and have always lived with very diverse communities. My wife is Latina and Egyptian, and her parents are both immigrants to this country. I mentioned that her mother's family fled Cuba. Her father left Egypt. So to me, diversity is what makes America beautiful and is something we should celebrate and not be scared of. But sadly, people sometimes retreat to their own, what's comfortable, what's familiar. And on the cease and desist letter, so I first of all just fully condemn what was said in LA, and I, obviously commit to never acting like that. But it's unconscionable what was said there. On the cease and desist letter, I don't support those kinds of tactics, which I said publicly. I don't think those of us in elected office have power, and we should not throw our weight around when we don't like what a community member is saying. We are all open to criticism, and we should be. And it's better to argue issues on the merits and to make the argument, not to try to silence someone. So I'm a believer in if you, and not just words, but in actions. I actually have every 2 weeks in my council, on the council office side, I have something called Chat with Matt on Zoom, where I have an open public forum. And sometimes people are very critical of me. I had one tonight, and a gentleman was criticizing my office. And so I would rather have open debate and dialogue. And in fact, that's part of why I think my campaign is doing well, even though some groups on either end of the spectrum are mad at me. I'm not conservative enough for the conservatives. I'm not progressive enough for the progressives, because I actually like to hear different viewpoints. I think we get to the truth when we actually have everybody in the conversation and we hear dissent. I want to hear the dissenting viewpoints. That's something I learned in business. You want to hear from the person who has a better idea. or who thinks, what we're doing isn't, can be done a different way. And so I like to embrace diversity of opinion. And I think that tactics like trying to silence someone with a legal threat is really not the way that our politics should work.
Last questions. 3 words that describe Mahan.
Oh, gee, let's see here. Well, the first one that comes to mind is what I was just talking about, which is independence. I am focused on what works and serving the community and not serving a particular political party or a particular interest group or a particular racial group. I'm just interested in a city that works for everyone. So being independent. Another is community centered, I guess you could say, or focused on the people. I am happiest when I'm out in the community amongst people. I like people a lot. It makes me very happy to be with people of all different backgrounds and to hear their stories and to spend time together. So community oriented. And then I guess the other would be curious. I am interested in always learning. I like to read. I like to learn more about issues. I like to learn about history. I try to learn about the complexity and the nuance of the issues we face because they aren't straightforward. There's a temptation in politics to just have a soundbite, to just say, oh, just hire more police officers or just raise taxes or just lower taxes. And the world's more complicated than that. And it's important that we really understand how things really work if we're going to change things for the better. So those would be my 3, I guess: independence, community oriented, and curious.
Thank you very much. Once
Thank
again,
you.
thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. You asked really good questions. Those were some of the best questions I've had in the entire campaign. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope you have a great night.